Welcome back to Mr. John Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new here, thank you so much for joining the family. Please hit the subscribe button so we can keep sharing inspiring stories like this with you on YouTube. Kane didn't hear the music, the laughter, or the festival host calling out raffle numbers. All he saw was her. Nisi stood near the row of food stands with two little boys at her sides, their faces bright with joy, their small hands tugging at her shirt. The moment he recognized them, his breath slipped away. His lemonade cup fell from his hand, hitting the ground and splashing across his shoes. But he didn't move. Javier and Felix looked so much like him that it felt as if the past had stepped out of his own memories and stood under the sunlight. For a man who had spent years pretending he'd made the right choice, that single moment struck hard. His chest tightened. His steps halted. His world shifted. What would you do if the person who once threatened to destroy your life suddenly had to face the family he walked away from? The scene cuts sharply to the past. His voice cold, sharp, unforgettable. Keep that baby and I'll ruin your life. Nisi's hands had trembled back then, but her voice didn't break. She stood taller than he expected, courage rising from someplace he couldn't touch. Then ruin it, she said with quiet strength. I'm keeping my child. Those words changed everything. But life has a way of shaping truth in ways pride never predicts. 5 years passed, and instead of breaking, she grew stronger. Instead of fading, her joy flourished. She built a home, a family, a life full of warmth. And when Kane saw who she had become, and the children who carried his eyes, he wasn't ready. Darling viewers, please tap like and comment I'm watching. It truly helps this story reach more wonderful people like you on YouTube. The morning sun washed softly across downtown Sacramento as Nisi stepped into the coffee shop, her portfolio tucked beneath her arm and the faintest smile touching her lips. The warm scent of roasted beans floated through the air, calming her before the rush of her day at the architecture firm. She pulled her hair into a neat bun and joined the line, unaware that this morning would redirect the entire path of her life. The man ahead of her glanced back with a polite expression. His tailored suit, silver-streaked hair, and quiet confidence told a story of success. He stood like someone used to being listened to. When his gaze met hers, he smiled as though he already knew she'd respond. "Morning," he said warmly. "First time here. I hope I'm not slowing the line." "No trouble at all," Nisi replied, shifting her portfolio. "This place just has a way of making people feel comfortable." He extended his hand. Kane Walker." She took it with an easy grin. "Nisi Carter." He held her gaze a moment longer than expected. "Nice name. Fits you." The barista called out orders, and the two of them stepped forward together. Their small talk felt effortless. Kane explained he was in Sacramento for meetings, and she told him she oversaw projects at a local firm. She enjoyed his attentiveness, his humor, and the way he spoke as if every detail mattered. When she paid for her cappuccino, he insisted on covering his own tea. "Would you join me for lunch tomorrow?" he asked, voice low, like a man who rarely heard no. Nisi surprised herself by nodding. "Tomorrow works." At noon the next day, they met at a quiet bistro near the river. Their conversation moved with an ease neither expected. He teased her about her love for sushi, and she laughed as he attempted, terribly, to roll imaginary pieces with his chopsticks. She listened as he described building his business from nothing. He listened as she shared childhood memories of Sacramento summers by the water. With every shared story, the space between them closed a little more. Instead of parting after the meal, they wandered toward the riverbank, enjoying the warmth of the afternoon. Ducks floated lazily across the water, and Nisi joked that even the ducks seemed to have better life planning than she did. Kane laughed, a deep, genuine sound, and the closeness between them shifted from casual charm into something tender. On a park bench overlooking the water, he brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered briefly, and Nisi's breath caught. She didn't pull away. "I'm glad we met," he murmured. "Me too," she whispered. Their first kiss was gentle at first, then fuller, as though both had been waiting for a moment they didn't realize they needed. When it ended, they smiled like two people who'd just stepped into something unexpected. That night she invited him to her apartment. They talked for hours, movies playing in the background, soft laughter filling her living room. The closeness that began near the river deepened naturally. By morning, sunlight spilled gently across her floor as she watched him wake on her couch. His expression carried a flicker of affection she didn't dare name yet. They grew closer in the weeks that followed. Dinners, quiet nights in, shared jokes, small touches that turned into something meaningful. Nisi let herself fall, piece by piece, into a world she didn't entirely expect but welcomed with an open heart. Until the morning everything changed. A wave of queasiness sent her rushing to the bathroom. When she saw the positive pregnancy test, her knees weakened. Her hands shook, not from fear alone, but from the strange bloom of joy rising inside her. She thought of his smile, his tenderness, the nights they shared. He deserved to know. She went to his downtown office, heart pounding as she waited in the lobby. When he finally stepped out, his face lit with genuine surprise. "Nisi? Everything okay?" They walked into his office. She sat on the couch, forcing her breath steady. "I'm pregnant, Kane." His expression froze. The calm, confident man she had grown to care for suddenly looked like he'd been struck. "You—" "What?" he said, disbelief, sharp in his tone. "I took the test this morning. I'm keeping the baby." He stepped back in a rush, rubbing his temples. "Nisi, this is impossible. I can't deal with this. I have too much at risk." Her heart tightened. "I thought you cared about me." He looked up, eyes hardening. "You need to end this. I'm not ready for something like this." Nisi stood, stunned. "I won't." His jaw clenched. "Then hear me clearly. Keep that baby and I'll ruin your life." Her world stilled. The man she kissed by the river now threatened everything she had fought for. Nisi swallowed her tears and lifted her chin. "Do what you want. I'm keeping my child." She walked out before he could say another word, her heart breaking yet fiercely certain. Darling viewers, please tap like and comment. I'm watching to support this channel and help this story reach more hearts on Mr. John Stories. Nisi stepped out of Kane's office building, with her hand pressed against her stomach, the weight of his words still echoing in her mind. Sacramento's midday sun lit the glass towers around her, but her world felt dimmer, colder than it had moments before. She paused near the curb, letting the reality settle. He had threatened her life, her career, her future, because she chose to give life to their child. Hurt pressed against her chest, but beneath it something sturdier emerged. She wouldn't crumble. She wouldn't let fear swallow her. She straightened her shoulders and inhaled deeply. She walked toward her car with a steadiness she didn't entirely feel, but one she intended to claim. If he wanted her to fall apart, he would be disappointed. Her baby deserved better than a mother paralyzed by someone else's power. Nisi sat behind the wheel for a moment, her fingers gripping the steering wheel as she replayed every second of their final exchange. There had been warmth between them once, real, tender warmth that felt promising. But the man in that office was not the man who held her hand by the river. Not the man who kissed her forehead after watching movies on her couch. This version of him stood behind power and pride, choosing fear over honesty. She wiped a single tear from her cheek before it could fall. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to the life growing inside her. The words steadied her pulse. She wasn't alone anymore. That thought brought her courage. Nisi drove home with a firmness in her chest she didn't know she possessed. She walked into her apartment, placed her keys on the counter, and exhaled slowly. Her home felt the same, yet everything about her future had shifted. She stood in the middle of her living room with her hands on her belly. The idea of motherhood had always felt distant, something she imagined at the right time, with the right person. But timing didn't matter now. Desire didn't need permission. Love didn't wait for approval. She set her portfolio on the couch and walked to the bedroom mirror. Her reflection showed a woman who had every reason to fall apart, yet she only saw someone preparing to rise. She gently touched her stomach again. "I choose you," she whispered. The simple declaration filled the room with a quiet strength. She called her doctor and scheduled a prenatal checkup. The woman on the phone congratulated her warmly. Nisi felt a small spark of joy hearing someone speak about the baby without fear or judgment. That spark grew as she wrote down her appointment time. She wasn't stepping into this journey with hesitation. She was stepping into it with purpose. The first weeks were difficult. Fatigue pulled at her limbs, and morning nausea kept her close to home. During one early morning, she sat curled on her bathroom floor, breathing through waves of sickness, whispering encouragement to herself. Her body was changing fast, and her emotions followed closely behind. She refused to let discomfort change her resolve. She learned to eat small meals, keep crackers at her bedside, and rest whenever her body demanded it. Each small adjustment made her feel more in control. At work, she moved carefully, hiding her symptoms as long as she could. Her colleagues noticed she carried ginger candies everywhere, but they didn't ask questions. When she finally shared the news with a few trusted coworkers, their excitement washed over her like warm sunlight. "You'll be a wonderful mother," one said, hugging her tightly. Nisi fought tears at kindness she hadn't expected. As her pregnancy progressed, she began preparing her home. She browsed gently used cribs online, compared paint swatches, and read articles about childbirth. She saved every spare dollar, reorganized her budget, and accepted that she might have to pause certain dreams temporarily. But she didn't view motherhood as an interruption. It was an addition, something deeper than any blueprint she'd designed. Her Sacramento community stepped in naturally, without being asked. Her mother, Lillian, brought her warm meals and herbal teas. Her cousin Tyra cleaned her kitchen one Saturday morning without announcing her intentions. Her church family prayed for her, and laughed with her during choir rehearsals. Even her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Lawson, left a tiny knitted blanket at her door with a note that read, "For your little one." Every gesture strengthened her spirit. Every hug reminded her she wasn't carrying this child alone, even if she was doing it without a partner. One evening, Nisi lay on the couch after a long day of work, her hand gently resting on her growing belly. The quiet in her apartment felt soothing rather than lonely. She closed her eyes and listened to her own breathing, imagining the tiny heartbeat inside her. She thought of the threat Cain had made, how he believed she would fold under pressure. Instead, his words ignited something fierce and lasting. The early months of pregnancy taught her resilience she didn't know she possessed. Every stretch of discomfort and every wave of anxiety came with a reminder she was becoming stronger. Motherhood wasn't something she stumbled into. It was something she rose into. Her journey was no longer tied to Cain's fear. It was tied to her courage. Nisi clutched the sides of the hospital bed as another contraction swept through her, stealing her breath before she could brace for it. She squeezed her mother Lillian's hand tightly, sweat beading along her forehead as nurses moved briskly around the room. The soft beeping of monitors and the steady encouragement from the medical team blended into a rhythm that grounded her. Her body worked with a determination she didn't know it possessed. She had prepared for this day through months of fatigue and hope, but nothing compared to the reality of bringing life into the world. "You're doing beautifully," a nurse assured her. "You're almost there." Lillian brushed Nisi's hair away from her face, whispering, "You've got this, baby. Just breathe." Nisi took a shaky breath, her heart pounding as the next wave approached. She focused on the quiet promise she had given herself months ago. Her children would be born in strength, not fear. She pushed with everything she had, feeling her world narrow to that one powerful effort. A sharp cry split the air. The room shifted instantly. Relief washed through her as the first baby's voice filled the space. A nurse lifted a tiny boy into view, his hair dark and curled, his little fists tight as he protested this new world. "Here he is," the nurse said warmly. "Your first son." Nisi's lips trembled as she reached out. "Javier," she whispered, naming him with the certainty of a mother who already knew his spirit. He looked strong, alert, as though he had arrived ready to take on anything. She barely had time to savor the moment before another contraction pulled her back under. She gripped the bed rails as the team guided her. Her voice broke, her breath caught, but she didn't retreat. She pushed again, her body shaking with effort. Moments later, a second cry rose, softer, more curious than the first. The nurse lifted another tiny boy with gentle hands. His eyes fluttered open as if studying the world before deciding how to greet it. "And here's your second son?" she said. Nisi laughed through tears. "Felix," she breathed, loving the gentle spark in his expression. He looked like joy wrapped in a small, perfect body. The nurses placed both babies against her chest. As their warmth spread across her skin, Nisi felt something inside her shift permanently. The weight of the world didn't disappear. It settled into a new shape she was ready to carry. "My boys?" she whispered, kissing their soft foreheads. Javier's cry softened as he nestled close, while Felix curled his tiny fingers against her. Her heart doubled in size. After the delivery, the room gradually quieted. Lillian held the twins with grandmotherly pride, humming an old lullaby as the boys blinked sleepily in her arms. Nisi watched them from the bed, her body tired, but her spirit overflowing. "You did so well," Lillian said, handing the babies back to her. "They're beautiful." Nisi pressed her cheek against Javier's hair. "I already love them more than I can explain." The first days at the hospital were a lesson in new rhythms. Feeding, diaper changes, skin-to-skin moments. Each task became part of the foundation she built for her sons. Nurses taught her how to swaddle them tightly, how to recognize their different cries, how to help them sleep. She absorbed every detail with a determination rooted in devotion. At home, the challenges arrived quickly. Sleep became a luxury she learned to chase whenever her boys allowed it. Some nights, she rocked both in her arms as they cried, their small voices echoing through the apartment. She whispered soothing words while pacing the living room, determined to comfort them even when exhaustion blurred her vision. There were moments she stood in the dim light of the nursery, wondering if she was strong enough to do this alone. But then one of the boys would curl into her chest, or reach out a tiny hand as if choosing her again, and the doubt faded. Javier proved to be the more restless sleeper. He loved being held, loved listening to the gentle hum of his mother's voice. If Nisi stopped rocking too soon, he reminded her with a soft cry. Felix, on the other hand, had a natural calm. He watched everything with wide, observant eyes, smiling in his sleep as though dreaming of something magical. He responded quickly to lullabies, and often soothed his brother by simply lying near him. Nisi learned to balance their personalities like a seasoned conductor guiding a duet. In the quiet hours of the night, when both boys were asleep against her chest, she made her vow. She looked at their tiny profiles, so delicate yet filled with promise. "I will protect you," she whispered. "From anything, from anyone. You will never feel the weight of someone else's fear. You will grow in love, not in the shadow of a threat." Her arms wrapped around them as though forming a shield. This moment marked more than the start of motherhood. It marked the birth of her transformation. The woman who walked out of Kane's office wounded now stood reborn in purpose. Strength grew with every heartbeat pressing softly against her skin. Nisi didn't just become a mother. She became the force her boys would lean on, the guide who would carry them forward, the protector who would never break under pressure. They were her beginning, and she was theirs. The apartment often woke before Nisi did. Most mornings began with the soft patter of tiny feet making their way to her bedroom, followed by Javier's eager whisper and Felix's giggle as they climbed into her bed. Their warm bodies pressed against her as they nuzzled into her arms, offering the sweetest greeting she could ever imagine. With two lively boys growing by the day, the quiet life she once knew had shifted into a steady mix of joyful noise and delightful chaos. Javier was always the first to stir. He tiptoed like a miniature detective, peeking through doorways as though investigating a mystery only he could solve. Felix, more playful, usually followed close behind, humming made-up tunes and tugging gently on his mother's hair as he tried to wake her. Both boys adored morning rituals. Felix pointing out shapes in the shadows on the wall, Javier naming items in the room as though cataloging his little world. Nisi stretched beneath them, exhaustion tugging at her but pride lifting her spirit. She rarely slept through the night, yet she handled every morning with quiet determination. The moment she opened her eyes, the boys erupted with stories. Javier spoke in quick bursts about a dream he insisted was real, while Felix performed dramatic reenactments with his stuffed bear. Their energy filled every corner of the home. Breakfasts were full of laughter, spills and crumbs everywhere. Javier liked to line up his cereal pieces by color before eating them, while Felix made a game of stacking fruit slices into wobbly towers that never lasted more than a second. Nisi often shook her head with mock seriousness, pretending to scold them before breaking into a smile she couldn't hide. Even on the toughest mornings, watching them devour pancakes with sticky fingers reminded her of everything she fought for. Balancing work and motherhood became an art form she mastered slowly. On days when she needed to prepare project updates for the architecture firm, she set up a small table beside her desk. The twins sat with crayons and scrap paper, scribbling masterpieces while she drafted floor plans. Javier copied shapes he saw in her sketches, proudly declaring, "I'm helping you." "Mommy." Felix preferred drawing people with wild hair, claiming each one represented his brother. During virtual meetings, the boys occasionally popped into the camera frame with snack requests or spontaneous hugs. Her co-workers quickly learned that Nisi's world came with 2 small buzzing satellites. Instead of annoyance, they greeted the boys with warm smiles and playful waves. Her supervisor often said, "If you can manage twins and these deadlines, you can manage anything." That reassurance boosted her confidence more than she expected. Nisi's identity shifted with every diaper change, every late-night rocking session, every presentation she completed while one of the boys clung to her leg. She no longer viewed herself through the lens of what she had lost. Her focus rested on what she was building, a life fortified by purpose and shaped by 2 tiny hearts. The more she embraced motherhood, the more she felt like she was stepping into a version of herself that had been waiting quietly in the shadows. The twins grew into animated chatterboxes with personalities that seemed to sharpen by the week. Javier adored details. He could spend 20 minutes rearranging toy blocks into neat rows, then explain his reasoning with remarkable seriousness. He liked pointing to buildings from their apartment window and asking why some were tall and some were short. Nisi answered every question patiently, smiling each time he furrowed his tiny brow in thought. Felix lived as though the world was a stage created for him alone. He loved making his brother laugh, even if it meant wearing socks on his hands or pretending to be a baby lion. When Nisi folded laundry, Felix often hid inside the empty basket, jumping out with a mighty roar that never failed to startle Javier. The 2 broke into giggles immediately after. Even simple outings turned into heartwarming adventures. During afternoon walks around their Sacramento neighborhood, the boys raced ahead on the sidewalk, while Nisi balanced grocery bags on her hips. Javier paused frequently to collect tiny treasures, smooth rocks, flower petals, bottle caps, each one labeled important. Felix skipped ahead with joyful leaps, greeting neighbors with an enthusiasm that never failed to charm them. Though each day carried its share of challenges, Nisi discovered that motherhood taught her resilience through action. She solved problems on the fly, improvised meals when time slipped away, and learned to laugh at the unexpected messes that filled her week. Through it all, she watched her twins grow into confident, curious little people who mirrored her strength in small, remarkable ways. At night, when the boys finally drifted to sleep, she studied their peaceful faces. She felt gratitude settle over her like a warm blanket. She managed the chaos, celebrated the joy, and navigated growth, for them and with them. The pieces of her old life felt distant now, not gone, but replaced with something more meaningful. As she closed the boys' bedroom door one evening, she paused and whispered, "We're doing it, aren't we?" And for the first time, she fully believed it. Darling viewers, if this part of Nisi's journey is touching your heart, please tap like and comment "I'm watching" to support Mr. John's stories and help this story reach more loving homes. Nisi carried the twins into the fellowship hall with a familiar sense of comfort. The soft hum of voices, the laughter shared across tables, and the scent of homemade meals lingered in the air as the community gathered after the Sunday service. Sacramento's Black community had become a foundation she never fully realized she needed, until motherhood made every connection feel deeper. Here, she wasn't just Nisi the project manager, or Nisi the single mother. She was Nisi, a member of a living, breathing family of hearts who cared for one another. The twins tugged at her hands excitedly. Javier eyed the dessert table with quiet interest, while Felix couldn't resist the drumbeat someone practiced at the other end of the room. Nisi barely had time to put down her purse before a familiar voice called out. "Bring those babies over here," Mrs. Eleanor said, arms open wide. Her soft gray curls framed a face lined with wisdom and kindness. She bent down to scoop Felix into her arms, as Javier shyly hid behind Nisi's leg. "Oh, look at them," she cooed, bouncing Felix gently. "Growing faster than my houseplants." Nisi laughed softly. "They keep me moving, that's for sure." Community members gradually filled the space around her. Someone placed a plate of chicken and greens into her hands before she could object. Another handed the twins slices of cornbread shaped like stars. These small gestures arrived without ceremony, woven into the rhythm of their shared lives. No one asked if she needed help. They simply stepped in with love. The church choir rehearsed in the corner, voices rising in layered harmony. The sound pulled Javier out of his shell, his eyes widening as the music swelled. He moved closer, placing his small hand on Nisi's thigh as he watched the group sway and sing. The melody drifted through the hall like a warm embrace. Felix wriggled down from Mrs. Eleanor's arms and joined two other children tapping on small drums. He couldn't keep rhythm yet, but his enthusiasm made up for it. Every offbeat tap sent him into fits of laughter. Nisi watched him with a full heart, reminded again of the simple joy her sons brought to the world. Family gatherings were a regular part of her routine now. Every other weekend, her apartment filled with cousins and aunties. Pots simmered on the stove, voices overlapped, and someone always danced in the kitchen. Nisi often joked that her tiny living room held more love than space. One Saturday, her cousin Tyra came over with homemade peach cobbler, declaring, "You've been working too hard. Sit down and let me take over." She ushered Nisi to the couch and occupied the boys with building blocks. Nisi watched them play from the corner of her eye, grateful to have a moment to settle into the cushions. Tyra's presence felt like a deep breath she didn't realize she needed. Aunt Simone stopped by later, bringing bags of groceries and fussing over whether Nisi had enough snacks for the twins. "Kids eat like little machines," she said, handing Javier a banana. He peeled it carefully, taking tiny bites like a miniature gentleman. Felix, meanwhile, demanded a second one before the first was finished, making everyone laugh. In moments like these, Nisi understood the meaning of rooted community. It wasn't just support. It was a bond built on shared history, shared struggles, and shared joy. Her sons grew surrounded by people who loved them as if they were their own. Every celebration, every gathering, every prayer formed a safety net that carried her through days when she felt the strain of doing everything alone. At her mother's house, the boys found another haven. Lillian's gentle voice guided them through simple lessons: how to say grace before meals, how to fold small blankets, how to care for others with patience. One afternoon, Nisi walked into the living room to find the twins perched on Lillian's lap as she taught them a hymn she grew up singing. They swayed softly, eyes half closed as they echoed her words. The sight brought a soft ache to Nisi's chest. Her childhood memories blended with their present in a way that honored both. Cultural traditions became part of their daily life. The twins learned how to clap along to calend response hymns, how to greet elders with respect, how to dance with unfiltered joy at backyard cookouts. They absorbed stories about ancestors and listened to elders recount memories that shaped their understanding of resilience. These lessons settled into them gently, guiding their identities long before they could articulate their significance. During community festivals, Nisi walked proudly with her boys. They wore matching shirts decorated by the kids' group at church, their designs dotted with bright colors and crooked smiles. Vendors sold jewelry, artwork, and foods tied to their heritage. Nisi often bought beaded bracelets for the twins, letting them choose their favorite colors. Javier usually chose blue. Felix always picked the brightest color available. At home, the twins reenacted moments from these gatherings. Javier pretended to direct imaginary choirs, waving his arms dramatically while Felix beat on overturned pots. Their joy carried the soul of their community into every room. Although Nisi handled the challenges of single motherhood alone, she never felt abandoned. Every laugh shared at church, every meal dropped off at her door, every prayer whispered on her behalf strengthened her foundation. Her sons grew up surrounded by voices that affirmed their worth and reminded them where they belonged. Nisi often whispered to herself late at night, "We're part of something bigger," and her heart believed it fully. Darling viewers, if this chapter speaks to you, please tap like and comment "I'm watching" so this story reaches even more beautiful souls through Mr. John's story. While Nisi built a life filled with warmth and community, Cain moved through his days in a world that looked polished but felt hollow. His success remained untouched. Meetings, business dinners, new contracts, and headlines praising his leadership. But none of it settled the restlessness that had taken root in him since the day Nisi walked out of his office. He never forgot the look in her eyes, the steadiness in her voice, or the strength she carried even as her heart cracked. That memory followed him everywhere, a quiet echo he couldn't silence. He worked longer hours than ever, often staying in the office long after the last employee had gone home. His staff assumed he was simply committed. They admired his discipline, unaware that he filled his time not out of ambition but out of avoidance. The quiet moments were the hardest. Something inside him shifted each time he imagined what her life might look like now. He told himself he had made the right choice back then, that protecting his empire meant sacrificing personal ties, but that justification thinned over time. Whenever he watched employees bring their children to the office on weekends, or saw families strolling near the river during his morning runs, something in him tightened. The sight sparked questions he didn't voice, questions he carried like a private burden. He sometimes sat in his penthouse living room at night, city lights spilling across the floor. He turned off the television, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling, letting memories surface against his control. He remembered how Nisi laughed with her whole self, the way her eyes softened when she listened, the way her presence slowed his thoughts instead of pushing them faster. He had pushed all of that away. More than once he wondered what her child would look like. He didn't dare imagine twins yet. Just one child, small and bright-eyed, perhaps with his curls or her smile. He pictured a tiny hand reaching for his, a voice calling him Daddy, a future he had once dismissed without fully understanding what he was losing. These thoughts haunted him, but he kept them buried behind the strong exterior that the world expected from him. Cain started donating quietly to charities supporting single mothers. He never announced it. He simply saw an opportunity to do something useful, something that eased a guilt he refused to name aloud. He reviewed scholarship applications late at night, focusing on women balancing school and parenthood. Each story made him think of Nisi, how determined she had been, how deeply she believed in doing what was right even when it cost her stability. In an attempt to reshape his thoughts, he filled his home with distractions. He redecorated his study. He bought new furniture for his balcony. He hosted business gatherings and attended charity galas, but each event ended the same way, him returning to an empty home that felt larger than before. One evening, he stood on his balcony with a drink in hand, watching the Sacramento skyline. The lights flickered across the water below, but instead of admiring the view, he found himself imagining Nisi in her apartment, perhaps reading bedtime stories or tucking her baby into a crib. He guessed her routines without knowing them. Did she hum to the child? Did she smile at their tiny expressions? Did she ever think of him? The uncertainty carved deeper into him than any business failure ever could. As the months passed, he felt a subtle shift in himself. He became more patient in meetings, more understanding with his employees, more attentive to the world outside his own concerns. It was as though Nisi's absence left behind a blueprint for who he wished he had been when she needed him. During a quarterly meeting, he caught sight of a young father soothing his infant daughter in the lobby. The man rocked the baby gently while speaking to a receptionist. Cain slowed his steps, observing the quiet tenderness in the father's movements, the way he held the child as if everything else faded. A pang hit Cain unexpectedly. He wondered if he would have known how to hold his own child with the same quiet confidence. The thought lingered long after he left the building. He didn't speak to anyone about his internal struggle, but those close to him sensed a shift. His assistant once asked if everything was all right, noting that he seemed distracted. Cain brushed it off, unwilling to reveal the truth. That regret had grown into something that shaped his days and nights. He sometimes pulled out his old phone, scrolling through messages he had never deleted. Small conversations with Nisi, a picture she once sent of the river at sunset, Her joke about him failing at using chopsticks. The digital trail of a connection he had destroyed with his own fear. He hovered over her contact more times than he admitted even to himself, but he never called. He had forfeited that right. The loneliness pressed hardest during holidays. He sat at his expansive dining table, set with pristine dishes, as the faint noise of families celebrating drifted through the windows from neighboring buildings. Each time he lifted his glass and forced himself to swallow the emptiness he had chosen. On one winter night he found himself sketching again. He rarely drew anymore, but his hands reached for a pencil without thinking. On the page he outlined a small home with wide windows and a fenced yard. He added 2 small figures running across the lawn and a woman standing near the door. Her silhouette resembled Nisi's more than he intended. He closed the notebook when he realized his heart had wandered into territory he didn't deserve. Kane's inner world grew more complicated with each passing year. What began as guilt became reflection, then longing, then a quiet hope he didn't dare entertain. He wondered where she was, how she was living, whether her child, his child, was thriving. He held on to these questions without answers, unaware that the day he faced the truth was approaching faster than he realized. And though he didn't know it yet, life was preparing to place him directly in front of everything he had walked away from. Sacramento glowed under the bright comfort of summer, as families spilled into the Juneteenth festival along the river. Music carried through the air, upbeat and full, backed by drums that pulsed through the lively crowd. Children ran between booths with painted faces, their laughter rising above the warm chatter of the event. The smell of seasoned food drifted in waves, drawing people toward colorful stands, lined beneath fluttering banners. Nisi walked through the festival grounds hand in hand with Javier and Felix, both boys now 5 years old, and noticeably different from the toddlers they once were. Javier carried a small notebook in his pocket, flipping it open every few minutes to sketch shapes inspired by the booths and decorations. He studied everything with quiet curiosity, taking his time as though each detail mattered. Felix marched ahead with confident strides, his small backpack bouncing with every step, greeting strangers without hesitation and testing the boundaries of every obstacle he saw. "Mommy, look!" Felix shouted, pointing at a balloon artist twisting a long green balloon into an animal shape. Javier leaned closer, whispering, "It looks like a dinosaur." Nisi smiled at the contrast, Felix bursting with excitement, Javier contemplating quietly. They made their way toward a small stage where children gathered around dancers performing traditional movements. The boys stopped, mesmerized by the beat of the drums. Felix mimicked the steps, kicking his legs out enthusiastically, while Javier copied the hand gestures with careful precision. "You two are naturals," Nisi said, brushing Javier's curls gently. She felt a deep peace settle inside her. Life had been kind to them. Their days were full, their hearts happy. The festival reminded her of how far they had come, from sleepless nights to school mornings filled with chatter and drawings on the refrigerator. A Ferris wheel rose above the festival grounds, its bright colors turning slowly against the sky. The boys tugged her toward it eagerly. She held their hands as they waited in line, the breeze carrying the sound of joyful chatter. When they finally climbed into their seat, the wheel lifted them upward, giving a view that stretched across Sacramento's skyline. Javier pressed his forehead gently to the glass. "It looks like everything is shining," he whispered. Felix grinned wide, waving at the people below as if greeting the entire city. Nisi wrapped an arm around both boys, savoring the peace she rarely had time to enjoy. Up there, above the music and crowds, the world felt soft and settled. She took a slow breath, thankful for the simplicity of the moment. The Ferris wheel descended, lowering them back into the energy of the festival. The boys hopped off and ran ahead toward a booth offering small games. Nisi followed with a relaxed smile, her heart light as she watched them play. She didn't notice the shift in the air immediately. Not until she turned to call to the boys and felt a strange pull, a sensation like someone watching her closely. She scanned the crowd without much thought. Families, vendors, groups of teenagers, nothing unusual at first glance. Then her gaze caught someone standing near the lemonade stand. He stood perfectly still. Kane. He looked older, sharper around the jaw, calmer in his stance, but unmistakable. His eyes locked onto hers with a force that halted everything around them. The cup in his hand tilted slightly, a streak of liquid dripping down his knuckles unnoticed. His entire body froze. Nisi's breath hitched as her heartbeat pushed against her ribs. Javier tugged her shirt from behind, asking something she couldn't process yet. Felix bounced at her side, still laughing at a small prize he'd won. But Nisi didn't move. Neither did Kane. His gaze shifted to the twins, two boys with familiar eyes, familiar curls, familiar presence. His expression broke open with shock, disbelief, something like recognition rising so quickly it robbed him of air. The boys stood in the sunlight, unaware of the history written across the space between their mother and the man staring at them as though he were seeing ghosts. Kane's chest lifted sharply as if the truth had slammed into him. Javier looked up at Nisi with confusion. Felix tugged on her arm. "Mommy, who's that man?" She swallowed hard but couldn't answer, because at that moment the world around them continued moving, but Kane did not. He had finally seen the family he never expected to face. Darling viewers, take a second to tap like and comment. I'm watching to support this story on Mr. John Stories. Nisi's pulse throbbed in her ears as she stood rooted in place, unable to look away from Kane. The hum of the festival faded into a distant blur. Drums, laughter, vendors calling out orders. All of it slipped out of focus. Only one thing remained sharp, the man who once threatened her future now staring at the two children who carried pieces of him. Kane's breath visibly stalled as he took in the sight of Javier and Felix. His eyes softened, widened, tightened again, trying to understand something he already knew deep inside. He stepped forward slowly, as if afraid a sudden move might shatter the moment. Nisi's hand shot out instinctively, guiding the boys behind her. Her arm trembled, but her voice stayed steady. "Stay close," she whispered. Felix peered around her hip with innocent curiosity. Javier tugged her shirt again, more quietly this time. "Mommy, why is he looking at us like that?" Nisi swallowed hard. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just stay beside me." But to Kane, it was everything. He finally gathered enough breath to form words. "Nisi." His voice cracked on the second syllable, low and almost unrecognizable. "It's really you." She stiffened. She hadn't heard that voice in 5 years. It washed over her with a mix of memory and anger she had buried deep. "Why are you here?" she asked, tone guarded. Kane stepped closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "I didn't know you were here. I wasn't looking for you." His eyes flicked briefly to the boys. "But I saw you and I—" "Mommy, who is he?" Javier asked again. Quieter now. Nisi pressed her lips together. "Just someone I used to know." Felix tilted his head, but he keeps staring. Nisi exhaled slowly. "I know." Kane's expression broke at their exchange. He looked at them with a mixture of awe and regret that seemed to weigh his shoulders down. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Nisi blinked, startled by how quickly he offered the apology she never expected to hear. "Sorry for what, exactly?" His chest rose and fell. "For everything I said. For everything I did. For the way I left you to face this alone." His words came out raw. "I never should have said those things to you." Her heart tightened. She hadn't come to the festival expecting to confront the past, much less hear remorse spoken so plainly. She held on to her composure like a fragile thread. Javier stepped out cautiously from behind her leg, his curious eyes bouncing between the adults. Felix followed, gripping his prize tightly. Kane crouched instinctively, lowering himself to their level, not reaching out, not assuming anything, just making himself small enough to not overwhelm them. "Hi," he said gently. I'm Kane." Felix squinted. "That's a funny name." Javier observed him silently, studying the shape of his jaw, the curl of his hair, the eyes that looked strangely familiar. Nisi felt her breath hitch. She wasn't ready for this. Not emotionally, not logically, not after 5 years of rebuilding her life. "You shouldn't be talking to them," she said sharply. "You don't get to walk in and—" "I know," he interrupted, still kneeling. "I know I lost every right. I just—" "Seeing them," his voice faltered. "They're beautiful." Felix brightened. "Thank you. Mommy did our hair today." Kane smiled softly, humbled by the child's sincerity. She did a great job. Nisi's jaw tightened. She didn't want this moment to feel gentle. She didn't want her children bonding with someone who once told her he would destroy her life. But the tenderness in his gaze unsettled her, carving open a part of her heart she had locked away. Javier took another tentative step forward. "Do we know you?" he asked. Kane's eyes glistened. "No," he whispered. "You don't, but I know about you." Felix blinked. "How?" "We never met you." Kane looked at Nisi briefly, seeking permission to speak. She didn't answer, but she didn't stop him either. "I knew about you because your mom told me long ago." His voice shook. "I didn't handle it well. I should have been there." Javier frowned thoughtfully. "So you're someone from before?" "Yes," Kane breathed. "Someone who made mistakes." Felix studied him again. Are you our daddy?" His question carried the innocent directness only a child could muster. Nisi felt her heart slam into her ribs. She reached for Felix, but he stepped slightly out of her grasp, still watching Kane. Kane closed his eyes briefly in pain before opening them again. His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm supposed to be—" Javier gasped softly and turned to Nisi. "Mommy, is that true?" Nisi's throat tightened. She nodded once, slowly, not trusting her voice. Felix's mouth dropped open in awe. "Mommy, that's him." The truth filled the small space between them like wind expanding a sail. Nisi steadied her breath. "This doesn't mean you can just show up and act like nothing happened," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I know," Kane said, rising to his feet. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I needed you to know I'm sorry." His gaze drifted to the boys again. "And I'm grateful they exist." For the first time in years, Nisi saw not the powerful CEO, but a man unraveling under the weight of his own choices. Felix tugged Javier's sleeve. "He looks sad." Javier nodded. "Yeah, really sad." Nisi inhaled deeply, grounding herself. "We're not doing this here," she said. "Not in the middle of a festival." Kane nodded quickly. "Of course, I'll follow your lead. Whatever you want." The tension didn't disappear, but something softened. Not forgiveness, not trust. Just a small crack in the wall she'd built. A beginning she didn't ask for, but couldn't ignore. For a moment, no one moved. The festival hummed around them with music and laughter. Yet the little group stood in their own quiet corner, suspended between the past and an unexpected possibility. Nisi kept her hands gently hovering near the boys, as though ready to pull them close at any moment. Kane stood a few feet away, careful not to cross whatever invisible line she had drawn. Javier was the first to break the silence. He tugged Felix's sleeve and whispered, "I want to ask him something." Nisi started to protest, but Javier's small voice came out steady. "Mommy, it's okay." Nisi's heart twisted. Her son was gentle but brave, traits she knew didn't come solely from her. She let out a slow breath. "Stay where I can see you." Kane dropped to one knee again, giving the boys his full attention. Javier took a cautious step forward. "Why weren't you with us?" he asked, voice sincere rather than accusing. The question stabbed quietly into the air. Kane swallowed hard. "Because I made a terrible decision a long time ago," he answered honestly. "One I wish every day I could take back." Felix frowned. "Did Mommy make you go away?" "No," Kane said quickly, shaking his head. "Your mom didn't do anything wrong. I did." His voice softened. "She was stronger than I was." Nisi felt a flicker of heat in her chest. Pain, pride, and something nameless all tangled together. She folded her arms, watching him carefully. She didn't interrupt. She needed to hear how he handled their innocence. Javier tilted his head. "Are you nice now?" Kane let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Shaky, amazed, humbled. "I'm trying very hard to be," he said. "I want to be someone you can feel safe around." Felix stepped closer, studying his face with squinted eyes, as if reading a secret code. You look like us, he said thoughtfully. Kane's eyes glistened. I know, he whispered. I see that. The boys exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations siblings shared. Then Felix asked, Do you want to play with us? Nisi stiffened. Felix. He turned to her with wide, hopeful eyes. Just a little bit, please? Javier chimed in softly. Mommy, we'll stay right here. Nisi closed her eyes for a moment. She wasn't ready, not fully. But she could see how much the boys wanted answers. Connection. Something to help them understand the world suddenly shifting around them. She drew a slow breath. Fine, she said gently. Right here. I'm watching. Kane nodded gratefully, as if she had handed him something fragile. Thank you, he murmured. The boys led him to a nearby game booth, a simple ring toss with small plastic bottles arranged in rows. Felix bounced excitedly. I'm going to win the big prize. Javier studied the angles with his usual quiet focus. Kane took 2 steps forward but paused, looking back at Nisi as if seeking another silent permission. She gave a single nod, her expression calm but guarded. He joined the boys. Felix immediately handed him a ring. Help me throw it. Kane kneeled beside him, adjusting the boy's aim gently without taking over. Try a softer throw, he coached. Let your hand move like this. Felix followed the motion, and the ring landed neatly around a bottle. His face exploded with joy. I did it! Mommy, look! Nisi lifted a hand in acknowledgement. Good job, baby. Javier stepped up next, unusually quiet. Kane noticed his hesitation. Do you want help too? He asked. Javier shook his head. I can do it myself. He threw his ring, missing by inches. He tried again, the same result. His brows furrowed. Kane leaned closer. You're aiming too low, he said softly. Try lifting your wrist like this. He didn't touch him, just demonstrated in the air. Javier adjusted. The next ring landed perfectly. His eyes widened with surprise, then pride. I did it. Kane smiled, overwhelmed by the small victory. You did. That was all you. Nisi watched from a few feet away, arms still folded but no longer tense. She could feel something shifting inside her, something she didn't want to trust but couldn't deny. Seeing Kane interact with the boys wasn't painful the way she expected. It wasn't confusing either. It was gentle. After a few more rounds, the boys ran to pick out their tiny prizes, plastic keychains shaped like stars. Javier carefully handed one to his mother. For you, he said. So you remember this day. Nisi touched his cheek. I won't forget it, she said softly. Kane stepped back a little, giving them space. His gaze drifted to Nisi, filled with sincerity she hadn't seen in him back then. Nisi, he said quietly, I never stopped thinking about you. Or them, not once. She inhaled slowly, her heart tightening around old memories. Thinking doesn't erase what happened. I know, he said, but I'm here now. If you'll let me be. Felix ran back, grabbing his hand without hesitation. Daddy, look at my keychain, he said proudly. Kane froze at the word. His eyes flickered to Nisi in silent question. She didn't correct the boy. That was her first step toward forgiveness. A small one, but real. The moment settled between them, tentative, emotional, fragile enough to fold yet strong enough to continue. Kane looked down at Felix and whispered, I'm proud of you. Javier nodded beside him. We like you, he said simply. Nisi exhaled. The beginning of a bridge formed between their two worlds. Darling viewers, if this part touched your heart even a little, please tap like and drop a comment saying I'm still here. It truly supports and helps this story reach more wonderful viewers like you. Nisi didn't say yes immediately when the boys begged for another chance to see Kane. Her heart was still cautious, her mind replaying every moment of hurt she once carried alone. But that night, after the boys fell asleep still chattering about the man they now knew was their father, she sat at the edge of her bed and breathed deeply. Something inside her whispered that shutting the door completely wouldn't heal anything. Not for her, and certainly not for the boys. So she agreed to one thing, a morning visit, 1 hour, at her home where she controlled the environment. Kane arrived early. He stood nervously on her porch, straightening his shirt, smoothing his jacket, then giving up entirely as he heard small feet pounding toward the door. The twins flung it open before Nisi could stop them. "Daddy!" Felix shouted. Kane froze, then knelt as Javier launched into his arms. He held them both awkwardly at first, as if trying to figure out how two little bodies fit into a space he'd never prepared. But the boys didn't notice. They simply clung to him, their joy unfiltered and genuine. Nisi stood a few feet back, arms folded loosely. She watched how he handled their excitement, nervous, stunned, but trying with every breath. It softened a corner of her resolve. "Come inside," she said quietly. Kane stepped into a home that looked nothing like the cold penthouse he lived in. Soft throw blankets draped the couch. Artwork from school projects filled the refrigerator. A faint smell of cinnamon lingered from breakfast. The boys dragged him straight to the kitchen table. "We made pancakes," Felix said proudly. "Kind of," Javier added, pointing to a tray. "Mommy did most of it." Nisi set down a plate in front of Kane, without ceremony. "They wanted you to try them." Kane picked up a fork, took a bite, and blinked. "This is really good." Felix puffed out his chest. "Because we helped." Nisi forced back a small smile. She wasn't ready to show that softening openly yet. Throughout breakfast, the boys peppered him with questions. "Where do you live? Do you have pets? What's your job? Did you eat pancakes when you were a kid?" Kane answered everyone with patience, sometimes humor, sometimes gentle honesty. When he didn't know the right words, he looked at Nisi briefly, as if asking silently whether something was safe to share. She appreciated that. After breakfast, the boys dragged him to their play area, a corner filled with building blocks, toy cars, and a well-worn rug. Kane knelt on the floor, letting Javier hand him blocks while Felix assigned him the role of car driver in one of his imaginative games. Nisi watched from the hallway, unseen. She saw something new in Kane, not the guilt, not the regret, but the awakening of a part of him that had been missing fatherhood. He wasn't perfect. He fumbled pieces. He forgot rules of their game. He bumped his head on the low shelf. Felix laughed so hard he rolled onto the rug, but Kane laughed too. A real, full laugh Nisi hadn't heard since before the threat that tore them apart. When morning stretched toward afternoon, Nisi checked the time. "Boys," she called, "that's enough for today. Let's say goodbye." Their faces fell, disappointment heavy and immediate. "Do you have to go?" Javier asked quietly. Kane nodded slowly, glancing at Nisi for approval. "I'll come back, if your mom says it's okay." All three looked at her. Nisi hesitated, then nodded once. "We'll see," the boys cheered. Kane exhaled in relief and stood, shoulders lowering as tension left him. "Thank you," he murmured to Nisi as the boys raced to get their shoes. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she studied him, searching for traces of the man who once threatened her future. She didn't see that man anymore. She saw someone trying. "Same time next week," she said finally. Kane's expression softened. "I'll be here." When he left, Nisi stood in the doorway watching his car disappear down the street. She felt the strangest sensation. Not fear, not anger, but the beginning of something she hadn't expected. A quiet belief that people could change. Kane's weekly visits turned into a steady rhythm that began to feel natural. At first, he kept his movements cautious, always checking Nisi's expression before taking the next step, whether it was helping the boys tie their shoes or reading to them on the couch. But as weeks passed, his confidence grew in small, almost tender increments. More importantly, the twins began treating his presence not as a novelty, but as part of their world. One Sunday afternoon, Nisi's mother stopped by unannounced with a container of gumbo and a smile that carried years of wisdom. She walked in, chatting as she set the dish on the counter. Then froze when she saw Kane sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, letting Felix braid imaginary driver hair into his curls while Javier built a tower on his knee. Nisi braced herself, but her mother simply nodded once, slowly. "So," she said, wiping her hands on a towel, "you finally decided to show up." Kane stood immediately, uneasy. "Ma'am, She lifted a hand. Don't explain. Just keep doing what you're doing. Nisi felt a wave roll through her chest, a shift she hadn't expected. Acceptance from her mother meant something deep. It planted a seed she wasn't ready to name yet. But she felt it there. As summer stretched forward, Kane began joining them for Sunday dinners. The first time he sat at that crowded dining table, surrounded by Nisi's cousins, aunties, and the loud warmth of family, he looked almost overwhelmed. Felix tugged him into a seat beside Javier, and Nisi watched quietly as he navigated the chaos of passing dishes, answering questions, and trying not to spill iced tea when her uncle made a joke. By the end of the night, he'd been roped into helping wash dishes, standing shoulder to shoulder with her Aunt Simone. He didn't complain. He simply smiled and rinsed plates, listening carefully as she gave him playful but honest warnings. "You hurt our girl again," Simone said, flicking water toward him, "and I'll personally come find you." Kane laughed nervously. "I don't plan on hurting anyone." "Good," she said. "Then you can stay for cobbler next week." Nisi watched that exchange from across the kitchen, feeling something inside her loosen. She wasn't falling back into the past. She was witnessing something new unfold. Months passed, and the seasons shifted. The twins insisted on inviting Kane to their first school presentation. He arrived early, sitting in the front row, knees bouncing with nerves. When Javier stood on the stage holding his hand-drawn poster of a bridge, he scanned the room until he spotted Kane's steady gaze. Felix, dressed as a tiny squirrel for the class play, kept waving from the wings until the teacher gently guided his arm down. Nisi glanced sideways at Kane. His eyes brimmed with emotion as he clapped harder than anyone when their sons finished. For a brief moment, their shoulders brushed. Neither moved away. Then autumn arrived with crisp mornings and longer evenings. Nisi's family insisted that Kane join them for the fall gathering, a night filled with warm foods, outdoor heaters, and quiet conversation under soft lights. Nisi didn't fight the invitation this time. During the event, Nisi's mother watched the boys race across the yard while Kane timed their sprinting games. "You've changed," she murmured to Nisi as they stood near the fence. "Have I?" Nisi asked, though her voice held no surprise. "You're breathing easier." Her mother smiled. "He's earning his way, step by step." Nisi didn't respond, but she held the truth gently. The holidays brought a new layer of closeness. On Thanksgiving morning, the boys begged for Kane to come over early so they could watch the parade on TV together. He arrived with a small tray of pastries, nothing fancy, but thoughtful. They sat on the living room floor, the twins leaning against his sides as Nisi prepared food in the kitchen. Every now and then she caught him watching her, a softness resting behind his eyes. They didn't speak about it. Not yet. When Christmas approached, the boys insisted he help decorate the tree. Javier guided him with careful instructions while Felix climbed onto his back, claiming he needed a tall helper. Nisi laughed from the couch, as Kane wobbled under Felix's weight, but refused to put him down. Later that evening, after the boys fell asleep under the twinkle lights, Nisi found Kane standing quietly by the tree. For once, he didn't try to hide the emotion on his face. "I never imagined this," he said softly. Nisi joined him, keeping a careful distance. "What part?" "All of it." He looked at her. "Them, and you, and the chance to be here." The air grew intimate, but not rushed, not forced, just honest. Nisi wrapped her arms lightly around herself. "They're happy you're here," she said. "And I'm glad they have you now." Something in his expression shifted. Relief, longing, gratitude woven together. He took a quiet breath. "Nisi, I never stopped loving you." His voice trembled, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of the truth he had carried for years. "I tried to bury it, but seeing you now, seeing who you've become, I can't pretend anymore." She didn't look away. Her heartbeat quickened, but she held her ground. "Love isn't the problem," she said gently. "Trust is." "I know." His voice softened to a whisper. "And I'm willing to earn yours for as long as it takes." Nisi didn't answer with words. Instead, she let the silence settle between them, a silence that wasn't cold, but full, warm, waiting. For the first time since they reunited, she didn't step back. The shift had begun. Winter settled gently over Sacramento, bringing crisp mornings and quiet evenings that wrapped the city in a softer tone. Inside Nisi's home, warmth radiated through every corner, partly from the heater, partly from the sound of two excited boys running circles around the living room, and partly from something new taking shape between the adults who stood watching them. Kane had begun stopping by after work, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to help with homework, or read the boys their favorite stories. Nisi had not formally invited him into a routine, but he slipped into one naturally, like a missing puzzle piece that somehow fit perfectly in shape and timing. One evening, the boys sprawled across the dining table with worksheets scattered around them. Javier carefully traced letters on his page while Felix doodled dinosaurs in the margins of his math assignment. Kane knelt beside them, pointing gently to Javier's numbers. "You got this part right," he said. "But look here. Try adding one more." Javier nodded, erasing neatly before writing the new answer. "Like that?" he asked. "Exactly," Kane replied, pride warming his voice. Felix leaned over, tapping his pencil. "Daddy, what's 6 plus 8? Kane thought for a moment. "You tell me. What's 6 plus 6? "Good. Now add 2 more," Felix beamed. 14. Javier rolled his eyes in playful annoyance. He didn't even do the work. Felix shrugged dramatically. "I'm talented." Nisi laughed from the stove as she stirred the pot simmering beside her. "Talented, huh? Let's see that energy when it's time to clean up." Felix made a face. Javier nodded seriously. "We're not talented at that, Mommy." Kane chuckled quietly. Nisi caught the sound and felt her chest warm in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel for years. He wasn't just helping. He was showing up in the places that mattered most, small moments, daily moments, the kind that built a childhood. After dinner, when the boys finally settled with warm milk and a picture book between them, Nisi watched Kane tuck them into bed. He sat on the edge of their twin beds, reading softly as both boys leaned against him. He didn't rush. He didn't posture. He let the boys' small hands grip his sleeve as they drifted closer to sleep. Nisi lingered in the hallway, looking at a scene she never thought she'd see, her children resting comfortably against the man who once walked away from them. The contrast made her chest tighten. This wasn't the same man she had confronted in that cold, intimidating office years ago. This was someone softened by regret, reshaped by longing, and anchored by newfound purpose. When he finished reading, he adjusted their blankets with care, brushing a stray curl from Felix's forehead before turning off the lamp. "They're out," he whispered as he stepped into the hallway. "I know," Nisi said softly. For a moment they simply stood there, facing each other in the dim glow of the hallway light. Something delicate pulsed in the silence. Longing, yes, but also recognition. "Can we talk?" Kane asked gently. They moved to the living room, settling on opposite ends of the couch. The space between them was small but meaningful. Nisi folded her hands in her lap. Kane rubbed his palms together nervously. "I don't want to push you," he began, "but being here, being part of their lives, it feels like breathing for the first time in years." Nisi looked down for a moment before meeting his eyes again. "You've been consistent," she admitted. "More than I expected." He nodded humbly. "Because I'm not pretending anymore. I don't want to be someone who regrets. I want to be someone they can count on. Someone you can count on." Her breath stilled. He exhaled slowly. "Nisi, you deserve someone who shows up, and I want to be that man. Not just for them, but for you." His voice lowered, tender and raw. "I love you." I never stopped. The sincerity in his eyes unsettled her. Not because it frightened her, but because it warmed something she had sealed away. She closed her eyes briefly. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know," he whispered. "I'm scared too." She opened her eyes again. "But I can't deny the changes I'm seeing. You've grown. You're patient. You're present. And the boys, they light up around you." He swallowed, hope rising slowly across his expression. "Does that mean—" "It means," she said gently, "that I'm willing to move forward. Slowly, carefully, but forward." He reached for her hand, hesitating, not assuming anything. After a second of searching his eyes, she let her hand fall into his. The touch was soft, familiar, and new all at once. They sat together, fingers intertwined, breathing in the quiet promise of something healing. Over the next few weeks, the shift became undeniable. They cooked together, sharing easy conversation while the boys set the table. They laughed over burnt toast, played board games on Friday nights, and passed evenings on the couch once the boys were asleep. One night, while cleaning up after dinner, their hands brushed. Nisi looked up. Kane froze. The world paused. Then she stepped closer, lifting her hand to his cheek. Her thumb brushed the line of his jaw, a touch filled with memories and hope. He leaned in, slow enough to give her time to pull back. She didn't. Their lips met in a gentle, careful kiss, a reconnection shaped not by impulse, but by growth, forgiveness, and everything they had rebuilt together. The family she once created alone was becoming something fuller, deeper, a family in the making. Life found a gentle, steady rhythm in the weeks that followed. Not rushed, not forced, just a natural blending of routines, as if the four of them had always moved together in the same direction. The mornings began with soft footsteps padding through the hallway, the boys waking. Before sunrise and whispering loudly until someone, usually Kane, peeked into their room with sleepy eyes. He had become a familiar presence in the house now, enough that the boys no longer asked if he was coming. They simply assumed he would. Some days he'd arrive early to help with breakfast. Other days he'd join them after work, loosening his tie as he stepped into a home that no longer felt unfamiliar. Nisi watched how easily he blended into their mornings, how naturally he fit between laughter and cereal spills, how his hand rested lightly on Javier's shoulder as he reviewed spelling words. The zoo trip marked a quiet turning point. It was a Saturday morning, clear and warm, with sunlight spilling across the driveway as the boys raced toward the car. Felix carried a map he had folded and unfolded a dozen times already. Javier held a notebook for sketches of animals he planned to study. Kane opened the back door, buckling seat belts with the care of someone who had practiced enough times to get it right. "Ready for the wildest day ever?" he asked. Felix threw up both hands. "I'm ready for the lions." Javier corrected him calmly. "We're starting with giraffes first." "Mommy said so." Nisi smiled as she fastened her seatbelt. "Let's just enjoy the day, okay?" When they arrived, the boys barreled toward the entrance, tugging Kane by both hands. Nisi followed behind, watching the scene unfold with a heart full of something she couldn't quite name, joy mixed with gratitude, threaded through with disbelief that life had changed so completely. Inside the zoo, the boys dragged Kane to the giraffe exhibit. Javier sketched while Felix begged to feed one. Kane lifted him just slightly so he could reach, steadying him gently as the long neck dipped toward them. Felix squealed in excitement, nearly dropping the food pellet, and Kane laughed, a deep, joyful sound that Nisi felt all the way to her chest. They made their way to the elephants, the penguins, the reptile house where Javier read every sign out loud. Kane pointed out facts he remembered from childhood visits, and Felix kept swinging his arms while imitating animal noises. They bought pretzels, rode the mini-train, and took a dozen photos, some blurry, some perfect, all filled with genuine smiles. Nisi walked beside them, noticing how naturally Kane positioned himself between the boys, how he reached out to steady Felix on the curbstone or leaned down to listen carefully as Javier explained his drawings. Their connection didn't feel new anymore. It felt rooted. When they arrived at the small zoo park, Felix insisted on racing Kane up the slide ladder. "You're slow," Felix teased. "I'm old," Kane countered. "You're not old," Javier corrected him logically. "You're medium." Nisi laughed, the kind of laugh that came from somewhere deep, somewhere healed. Later that week, school held a small family event, a reading showcase. Nisi arrived with Kane beside her, and the boys proudly held both their hands as they walked into the classroom. Teachers smiled warmly. Other parents nodded politely. But what struck Nisi most was the way the boys kept looking back at Kane, making sure he was still right there. During the showcase, Javier read his short story about bridges, how they connected two sides and made travel easier. Felix stood beside him, holding up pictures he had colored. The class clapped, but Nisi noticed only one thing, the way Kane's face lit with pride that reached all the way to his eyes. Afterward, the teacher approached. "Your sons are thriving," she said, "and they seem very happy." Nisi nodded, glancing at the boys tugging on Kane's coat. "They are." At home, their evenings carried the same soft rhythm. Kane cooked with Nisi while the boys built blanket forts in the living room. Some nights he read bedtime stories. Other nights he simply lingered in the doorway, watching Nisi gently tuck the twins under their covers. Nisi often found herself reflecting in the quiet moments. In the kitchen as she wiped down the counters. In the hallway as she listened to the boys laugh with Kane. In the car as she drove to work the next morning. Her mind replayed how far they had come. From the fear and chaos of early motherhood to the strength she had built alone, to this new, unexpected unity. One night, after the boys drifted off and Kane walked her to the door, she paused. "You're good with them," she said softly. He smiled. "They make it easy." She shook her head. "No, it's you. You've shown up. You've been steady." He held her gaze. "I told you I'd earn it." Nisi felt her heart expand, warm and full. She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. The future, once filled with uncertainty, was slowly taking shape. One morning, one school event, one shared moment at a time. A new rhythm, a new beginning. The more time they spent together, the clearer it became that the past couldn't stay unspoken forever. The boys didn't sense it, the tension hiding beneath the surface, but Nisi felt it every time she looked at Kane. And Kane felt it every time his eyes lingered on her, a moment too long. Their new rhythm was beautiful, steady, warm. But it could not be complete until they confronted the crack that once split their entire world apart. It happened one quiet evening after dinner. The boys were on the living room rug, building a city out of blocks. Felix assigned himself the role of mayor, while Javier drew roads and signs on scraps of paper. Their laughter drifted softly through the room. Nisi and Kane stood in the kitchen, stacking plates beside the sink. The atmosphere was peaceful, so peaceful that the truth pressed forward, demanding to be heard. "Kane," Nisi said gently, drying her hands on a towel, "we need to talk." He froze. He knew exactly what she meant. He turned toward her with cautious eyes. "I figured we would. Whenever you're ready." They moved to the dining table, close enough to feel each other's presence but not touch. The boys were only a few feet away, but absorbed in their game, completely unaware of the emotional mountain rising behind them. Nisi's voice was calm but steady. "Back then, when I told you I was pregnant, you said something I'll never forget." Kane's breath caught. "Nisi." She lifted a hand, stopping him. "Let me finish." He nodded, settling back, bracing himself. "You told me if I kept the baby you would ruin my life." Her words were not angry. They were honest, spoken without trembling. "I was terrified, not just of being a mother alone, but of the man you were in that moment." Kane closed his eyes briefly, pain flashing across his face. "I know," he whispered, "and I've replayed that moment every day. The anger, the fear, the cowardice. I hated myself the second you left my office. There's no excuse, none." Nisi watched him carefully. "Why did you say it? Why was that your reaction?" Kane swallowed. "Because I was afraid of losing control. My whole life was built on discipline, image, predictability. But you cracked all of that open. I cared about you in a way I didn't understand. When you told me about the baby, I didn't react as a man. I reacted as someone who didn't know how to be human." His voice trembled. "I thought walking away would keep my life steady. Instead, it became empty." Nisi looked down at her hands. "You left me carrying our children alone." "I know," he murmured. "And that's the regret I'll live with forever." Nisi inhaled slowly, grounding herself. "Kane, I forgave you in pieces over the years. Not because I wanted you back, but because I needed to heal. Then you showed up at the festival, and everything I'd buried rose to the surface." He leaned forward, eyes intent. "I'm here now because I want to do right. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation. Out of love. For them. And for you. The honesty in his voice reached deeper than Nisi expected. The man sitting in front of her wasn't the same man who once pushed her away with fear. He was gentler, steadier, and more vulnerable. I believe people can change, Nisi said softly. And you have. That's why you're here. That's why I opened the door again. Kane exhaled shakily. Do you forgive me fully? Nisi paused, not to find the answer, but to let it arrive honestly. Finally she nodded. Yes. Fully. His eyes glistened. For a moment, he looked like he might break open with relief. But before either could speak again, Felix ran over with a plastic block in his hand. Mommy! Daddy! Look! I made a rocket! He bounced proudly, holding up his crooked creation. Nisi smiled softly. It's perfect, baby, Kane laughed. Looks like it could land on Mars. Javier approached more slowly, studying both adults with perceptive eyes far older than 5 years. Were you guys talking about us? Nisi hesitated. Kind of. Javier considered this. Are you mad at Daddy? No, Nisi said softly. We're just talking about grown-up things. Javier nodded. Then he reached out and placed one hand on Nisi's arm and the other on Kane's, connecting them gently. Can we be a real family now? He asked quietly. Felix gasped, throwing himself between them. Yes. Mommy, Daddy, we should all live together. Nisi's heart trembled. Children had a way of simplifying what adults complicated. Kane knelt beside them. We're working on it, he said, voice gentle but full. Being a family means taking care of each other every day, and your mom and I are making sure we do that right. Felix threw his arms around Kane's neck. Javier wrapped his around Nisi. The 4 of them formed a circle on the kitchen floor, an unspoken promise binding them tighter than any words could. Nisi met Kane's eyes over the boys' heads. For the first time, she didn't look away. Her forgiveness wasn't just spoken. It had begun to live between them. Spring settled into Sacramento with a softness that made everything feel lighter. The trees along the river bloom every year, but this time the blossoms felt different, like they were marking a shift in the lives of the 4 people who now moved through each day with a sense of growing unity. Nisi noticed the difference most in the mornings. The boys woke up excited, eager for breakfast together. Kane arrived early on weekdays sometimes, just so he could drive the kids to school with her. Their laughter filled the car, their stories overlapping as Kane listened with patient warmth, and Nisi found herself smiling more than she had in years. One Saturday, Kane suggested a picnic by the riverfront. The blossoms are beautiful this time of year, he said. The boys will love it. Nisi agreed, unaware that he had been planning something for weeks. They arrived in the early afternoon, the sky clear and bright. The boys ran ahead, chasing each other between the trees while Nisi spread a blanket on the grass. The cherry blossoms above them swayed gently in the breeze, petals drifting like soft confetti. Kane unpacked the basket, sandwiches, fruit, juice boxes for the boys, and Nisi's favorite sparkling drink. Everything was simple, thoughtful, warm. They ate, talked, and watched the boys play. Javier lined up fallen petals and studied their colors while Felix tried to catch them mid-air. The peace of the moment wrapped around them like a quiet blessing. After lunch, Kane wiped his hands on a napkin and looked at Nisi with a calm but determined expression. It was the look of someone whose heart was ready for the next step, someone who had finally forgiven himself and was hoping she had forgiven him too. Can we take a walk? He asked softly. Nisi nodded, feeling a flutter of anticipation she couldn't quite name. The boys tagged along, skipping ahead as the adults walked behind them. Cherry blossoms fell around them, landing in Nisi's hair, on Kane's shoulders, on the boys' jackets. Then suddenly, Javier stopped walking and turned to face them. Daddy, he whispered loudly. Is it time? Nisi blinked. Time for what? Felix clasped his hands behind his back, rocking on his toes. A surprise. Kane took a breath, steady, full of emotion, and stepped forward. Nisi, he said, voice warm but trembling slightly. I want to say something before anything else. She stood still, listening. I spent years wishing I could undo the worst moment of my life, the moment I pushed you away instead of choosing you. His voice grew rough. But these past months, you've given me something I never thought I'd have again. A chance to be the father I should have been. A chance to love you the right way. A chance to build something real. Nisi felt her throat tighten, but she didn't look away. Cain continued. I've watched you raise our sons with strength and grace. I've watched you heal yourself. I've watched you let me in slowly, carefully, beautifully. And every day, I've thanked God for allowing me to be part of this family. He looked down at the boys. Ready? He whispered. The twins opened a tiny wooden box they had been hiding behind their backs. Inside, cushioned on velvet, sat a ring. Simple, elegant, shimmering under the sunlight. Felix held the box with both hands. Mommy, we helped pick it, Javier added proudly. We told Daddy it had to be pretty, because you're pretty. Nisi covered her mouth, tears rising. Cain lowered himself to one knee, exactly where the cherry blossom petals fell the heaviest, creating a circle of color around him. Nisi, he said softly, I'm not asking to erase the past. I'm asking to build the future, with honesty, with respect, with love, and with the family we've already started. Will you marry me? Will you let us be a real family, every day for the rest of our lives? The wind carried the boys' excited breaths. Nisi felt the full weight of her journey. Pregnancy alone, sleepless nights, heartbreak, survival, rebuilding, and now the healing she never imagined possible. She looked at Cain, then at the twins, then back at the man who had transformed himself one patient step at a time. Her voice trembled, but her heart was steady. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. Felix shouted, we did it. Javier hugged her leg tightly. Now we're a real family. Cain rose slowly, slipping the ring onto her finger. Nisi threw her arms around him, holding him close, as the twins wrapped themselves around their legs, forming a warm, laughing, tear-filled cluster beneath the blooming trees. Cain pressed his forehead to hers. Thank you, he murmured. For forgiveness, for love, for everything? Nisi smiled through her tears. You earned this. All of it. The boys held both their hands as they walked back toward the picnic blanket, petals swirling around them like a blessing, a new beginning, a chosen future, a family, complete. Darling viewers, if this story touched you, please like the video and comment. Family wins. It truly supports Mr. John's stories and helps this message reach more beautiful souls. Time does not erase wounds. Effort and accountability do. People can change, but only when they choose growth and take responsibility. Forgiveness is not weakness, it is a gift you give yourself. Love is not proven by words, but by consistent action. Family is not defined by perfection, but by commitment, care, and unity.